On the 9th of December 1745, Horace Walpole, the Earl of Orford and son of the first Prime Minister of Great Britain, wrote a letter to a friend in Florence. In it, he detailed the drama of the ongoing Jacobite rising, and in particular, the arrest of a man accused of being a foreign spy. The odd man, so Walpole described him, went by the name of Count of Saint Germain and had been in England for the past 2 years. A violinist who could play wonderfully, sing and compose, he was also, so the Earl wrote, a madman. Not very sensible and full of mystery, the man refused to tell anyone who he was or from where he had come. After all, the name to which he answered, the Count of Saint Germain, was a pseudonym, and was rumoured to conceal a colourful past. Indeed, despite trying to figure out who he was, little could be uncovered, with all manner of whispers surrounding him. He is called an Italian, a Spaniard, a Pole, a somebody that married a great fortune in Mexico and ran away with her jewels to Constantinople, a priest, a fiddler, a vast nobleman. Ultimately, with nothing to be made out against him, the man was released and soon after left the country. This strange letter is one of the earliest known references to the Count of Saint Germain, a sensational and enigmatic historical figure who has fascinated for centuries. Diversely labelled a swindler, an adventurer, a friend and counsellor of kings and princes, a hero of romance, a virtuoso in music, and a lunatic, he is best remembered for being a great occultist, a mystic who is said to have had such tremendous command over secret alchemical knowledge that he possessed the Elixir of Life, making him a real-life immortal. And far from being a mere dramatic boast, his immortality, both in the 18th century and today, has been consistently championed by his admirers, corroborated by anecdotes, and even supported by historical records. Before we take a deeper look at this incredible enigma, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, a champion of mysteries in their own right, Hunter Killer. Hunter Killer is a murder mystery subscription box. Unlike any other game you've played before, Hunter Killer invites you to channel your inner super sleuth and immerse yourself in classic detective work to find and follow clues to unmask a killer. Sent as a monthly subscription box, the game is very much interactive, containing physical pieces of the puzzle that are reminiscent of a real-world murder case, from letters and other documents to tourist brochures and even souvenirs. Story-driven and hands-on, it is incredibly immersive. I've never played anything like it. Sometimes I was even left questioning whether or not I was handling a real detective case. The mystery is episodic, with every 6 boxes being a new case. I cut my teeth as a private detective in Mallory Rock, a fictional small town in Maine that was the scene of the allegedly accidental death of Beth Ferris Hendricks. Full of puzzles and mystery, the case is both much more challenging and much more engrossing than I had expected. The perfect way to spend an evening. I played with my husband Eric, but Hunter Killer is also great when played alone as a fun challenge or with friends and family, being a game night to remember. It truly is a must for any fans of true crime, mysteries, the strange and spooky. And so, if you want to live out your Sherlock Holmesian dreams, I encourage you to go to hunterkiller.com/scholar and use my exclusive code SCHOLAR to receive $10 off your purchase. Doing so not only helps to support my channel, but also the Cold Case Foundation, an organisation dedicated to solving real-life cold cases, to which Hunter Killer donates part of their proceeds. Thank you. Who was the Count of Saint Germain? Such is a question that has perplexed many, both his contemporary associates and present-day researchers obsessed with his enigma. After all, as established by Horace Walpole in the 18th century, it was impossible to speak of the man without passing a comment on his murky origins. That he seemed to float, drifting from one corner of Europe to another, and then on to further afield, only served to magnify the mystery. He had wandered Europe, travelled to Africa, visited India, explored the Himalayas. even being personally involved in the plot to install Catherine the Great on the Russian throne. By his own admission, he had spent 5 years at the court of the Shah of Persia, learning about diamonds and other precious stones, as well as the secrets of nature. And it was even said that he had somehow been present through teleportation, bilocation, or ordinary means of travel at the signing of the American Declaration of Independence. Saint Germain could also speak many languages fluently, trifles, so it seemed, that he had acquired in the course of his adventuring. German, English, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and French, not to mention knowledge of Latin, Arabic, Chinese, and ancient Greek. Clearly the man was well educated. More than that, being an accomplished musician who could play multiple instruments and an artist who could paint beautifully in oils, he had had an aristocratic upbringing. But from where? As for the Count himself, he is said to have spoken little about his past, and when he did, the information he provided was as boggling as obscure silence. One tale said to date to 1723 by Isabel Cooper Oakley, the author of a 1970 biography about the Count, describes an interaction between Saint Germain and the young Countess of Genlis and her mother. It was evening and all were in attendance at a high society party. After listening to the then 10-year-old Countess sing, the Count is said to have entered into pleasant conversation with the child and her mother. Encouraged by the friendliness of this fashionable man, the Countess's mother ventured to ask him if Germany was his fatherland. To this, Saint Germain supposedly sighed deeply and replied that there are some things of which one may not speak. He then proceeded to reveal how he was 7 years of age when he was wandering in woods, and that a price was set upon his head. On my birthday, so the Count told the lady and her child, my mother, whom I was not to see again, bound her portrait round my arm. At these words, Saint Germain threw up his sleeve and showed the ladies a miniature of an exceptionally beautiful woman. She was, according to the contemporary testimony, wearing a peculiar costume. When the young Countess questioned the man, asking to what date does this dress belong, he is said to have, without answering, put down his sleeve again and brought forward another topic. Another strange story dates to the 1760s, when the Count, by now a frequent feature of French high society, attended a soirée hosted by Madame de Pompadour, the famed mistress and confidant of the then French king. Another madame in attendance that night, the elderly Countess von Georgi, is said to have watched Saint Germain from a distance for some time. Upon learning the man's name, she, surprised, was unable to control her excitement and approached him. The wife of an ambassador, the Countess had lived in Venice some 50 years earlier and wished to know if Saint Germain's father had been in that same city at that same time. No, madame, the Count is said to have responded. It is very much longer since I lost my father, but I myself was living in Venice at the end of the last and the beginning of this century. I had the honour to pay you court then. His tone was unconcerned and genial, and yet the Countess was horrified. The man who stood before her looked to be around 45 years of age, making it quite impossible for him to have been in Venice when she remembered him in 1710. Let alone even earlier. When she expressed this to the Count, he is said to have replied coolly, "Madame, I am very old." It is claimed that he then proceeded to verify his identity, recounting a number of familiar little details to their sojourn in the Venetian states. Von Georgi was convinced, and so Saint Germain's reputation grew from being an extraordinary man to an impossible one. And such was true everywhere the man went. When in 1760 a fellow adventurer, the famous Italian author and philanderer Casanova, met Saint Germain in Holland, he was left astounded, and wrote how the Count would say, in an easy and assured manner, that he was 300 years old. An 1868 French edition of the memoirs of Karl Heinrich von Gleichen, a diplomat in Paris born in 1733, who knew Saint Germain very well, even corroborated the von Georgi link. He wrote how he had heard the French composer Jean-Philippe Rameau and an old relative of the French ambassador at Venice testify to having known Saint Germain in 1710, when he had the appearance of a man of 50 years of age. Eternally middle-aged, ever charming, finely dressed, knowledgeable and princely, the Count of Saint Germain's reputation as an omnipotent immortal enthralled European high society, with even Voltaire writing, albeit tongue-in-cheek, that Saint Germain is a man who never dies and who knows everything. As theories of the mysterious man's origin abounded, attention naturally turned to how it was possible that he had defied aging. Something of particular interest is how, wherever the man went, he established laboratories. When he arrived in Paris in 1757, introduced to the French king by one of his ministers, Saint Germain was not merely well received, enjoying the personal protection and friendship of Louis XV and his family, but was also given a suite of rooms at Château de Chambord. This included a laboratory fitted up for experiments, which attracted a group of students eager to learn about the Count's exceptional scientific knowledge. According to the Countess of Genlis, who wrote about Saint Germain after knowing him as a child, he would never consent to give up his secret, but was happy enough to prove his excellence. On one occasion, the king is said to have ordered a middling-sized diamond which had a flaw in it to be brought to him. After having it weighed, Louis XV explained to the Count that in its current condition, the diamond was valued at 6,000 livres. Without the flaw, it would be worth 10,000. Was the Count, so the king asked, able to make him 4,000 livres richer? After examining the jewel, Saint Germain is said to have responded that it may be done, and that he would return it to the king in a month's time. When he did, the flaw was gone. Weighing the same as it had done a month earlier, the diamond was now worth 10,000 livres. Overcome with surprise, the king kept the gem as a curiosity. Such a feat, despite its astonishing nature, was said to have been commonplace for the Count of Saint Germain. Casanova informs us that he had a mastery over nature and could melt diamonds, and the 19th century occultist Eliphas Lévy remarked in his writings that the Count was said to have known how to fuse diamonds, so that there was no trace of the operation, and was also capable of imparting greater brilliance and ductility to copper, an invention which would have made the fortune of whoever devised it. And indeed, the mysterious Count must have been wealthy. According to various contemporary descriptions, he dressed simply, but with taste, with his only luxury being the large number of finest diamonds with which he was fairly covered. On each of his fingers, set in his snuff boxes and watches, and even on his shoe buckles, with one observer remarking that an expert on precious stones had estimated the diamond-encrusted buckle's value to be a tremendous 200,000 francs, some $30,000 before one even begins to consider the price distortion caused by over 200 years' worth of inflation. Fascinatingly, despite all of these jewels, there are no known records of the Count having possessed a bank account, or having any acknowledged source of income, beyond, of course, the speculation of alchemy. And yet, for all of this, one can argue that the Count of Saint Germain's most valuable possession was something other than his vast gem collection. After all, his alchemy is claimed to have been the source of his longevity. Occupied with the purification, maturation, and perfection of minerals, alchemy is a controversial branch of natural philosophy which has been practiced for centuries. Oftentimes illegal for the threat it posed currency if alchemists were able to transmute, as is typically claimed, base metal into gold, the esoteric science's ultimate aim is the uncovering of the prima materia, that primitive first matter required for the alchemical magnum opus, the creation of the legendary Philosopher's Stone. With it, one would conceivably be able to, alongside transmuting metals, create the Elixir of Life, and thus never die. With his knowledge of perfecting diamonds, of changing copper, and his ability to remain frozen in time as a 45-year-old man, it is said that the Count of Saint Germain possessed this incredible alchemical artifact. Returning to the story of the Countess von Georgi, one uncovers something once again peculiar. Describing her encounters with Saint Germain in Venice to Madame de Pompadour, the by then old woman revealed that she had once received from the Count a remarkable elixir. It had, so the Countess alleged, for fully a quarter of a century preserved unaltered the youthful charm she possessed at 25. Infinitely curious, Madame de Pompadour is said to have subsequently conducted her own investigations, which revealed from the mouths of several elderly gentlemen who had known von Georgi when she was younger that it was true. The youthful appearance of the Countess had indeed stood still for a length of time. Further references to the existence of some sort of magical elixir come from Russia, where Saint Germain, active in the 1760s and 1770s under a different alias, is said to have given an elixir for long life to a prince. It was, however, in northern Germany that the Count supposedly conducted a large portion of his alchemical experiments. Travelling there in 1779, he befriended the Landgraf Karl von Hessen-Kassel, a princely nobleman and respected general who had a keen interest in mysticism and was a member of several secret societies. After impressing von Hessen-Kassel with his charming company and extensive gem collection, Saint Germain was given a laboratory where the two men proceeded to meet often and perform many alchemical experiments together. According to the Landgraf's cousin, not merely did they work together on all sorts of hidden arts, they communicated with ghosts and supernatural beings also, with these entities said to appear at Saint Germain's command. Such would be utterly unbelievable were it not corroborated by so many other writers at the time, including Karl von Hessen-Kassel himself, who wrote of the Count fondly in his personal memoirs. And yet, it was not to last. According to local records, the register of the St. Nikolai Church in Eckernford, the Count of Saint Germain died on the 27th of February 1784. Only a few days later, he was buried, and then the following month, his possessions auctioned. And so, the man was not immortal. Or was he? For despite there being a record of his death, many at the time utterly asserted the Count was alive, as he ever was. Writing in 1821, the Countess of Adhemar, a lady-in-waiting and intimate friend of the ill-fated French queen, Marie Antoinette, described how she knew Saint Germain well, having known him during the time of Louis XV and later when the Count returned to France to give a warning to the old king's successor. Received by Marie Antoinette upon the Countess's recommendation, Saint Germain told the young queen that certain elements in society would overthrow the monarchy, and even described how in future the axe of the executioner would bring an end to royalty in France. It was his intention, so he claimed, to point out to her the dangers which threaten her crown, in the hope that bloodshed could be avoided. And yet, as history so terribly records, avoidance was not to be. Marie Antoinette and her husband, Louis XVI, were executed, and Saint Germain's prophecy realized. The most incredible part is yet to come, however. According to the Countess of Adhemar, the Count of Saint Germain was present at the execution of the French queen, some 9 years after his own recorded death. Not merely that, the Countess, in her memoirs, alleged that she saw Saint Germain a further 5 times before her own demise in 1822. On each occasion, the man was said to have been totally unaged. Yet another report of the immortal Count came from Jean-Baptiste Aliette, a French occultist who popularized tarot divination to a wide audience, who also claimed to have been a pupil of Saint Germain. A year after the Count's supposed death, Aliette and he are said to have lunched together, with Aliette stating that the Count was 325 years old at the time. Remarkably, this age is consistent with the one alleged by Casanova. For the next 200 years, the Count of Saint Germain can be traced in and out of history. Known by various different names, including Major James Fraser in the 19th century, he is claimed to have continued on, socializing and experimenting, occasionally influencing society from the shadows. In the closing of the decades of the 1800s, Helena Blavatsky, the Russian mystic who co-founded the Theosophical Society, is yet another who claimed to have met him. Describing him as a master of ancient wisdom, she alleged that he was a physical incarnation of an enlightened, disembodied being who travelled from a higher realm of spiritual awareness to guide the spiritual development of mankind. There is even a photograph of Blavatsky with 3 so-called masters, one of whom the caption labels as Lord Saint Germain. It was in the 1970s, however, that Saint Germain supposedly made his most well-disseminated resurgence, this time in the guise of Richard Chanfrey, a Frenchman who claimed to be able to transmute lead into gold. Far from being a sleight of hand or any other form of trickery, this act was claimed to have been a true alchemical feat. Certainly, in a 1972 documentary, he appeared to provide a demonstration. Given lead wire by a film crew, he instructed for it to be dipped into powder which he had supplied. The powder, so he claimed, was what we know as the Philosopher's Stone. With Chanfrey not touching the equipment at any point during the experiment, only providing verbal guidance to the interviewer, the lead was then placed in a crucible and heated up. Cooled down and removed, it was indeed now gold. Verified by experts to have been the precious metal, the gold wire was also found to be the precise same dimensions as the original lead. And yet, as impressive as this on-camera demonstration may have been, it can be said that the interview quickly runs away from the viewer, testing our credulity to the utmost. Despite appearing cool and calm throughout, the claims made by Chanfrey are fantastical. Claiming to be 17,000 years old at the time of the interview, he states that he is the same Count of Saint Germain who was friends with Louis XV and Madame de Pompadour. Not merely that, he then, on camera, proceeds to introduce an unspeaking woman as the ageless Madame herself, also claiming to have kept the old king youthful and living in luxury in the south of France, where they holiday together and visit nightclubs. And if all of this was not unbelievable enough, he goes on to claim that his lineage comes from Atlantis, that there is a destroyed base on Mars belonging to his people, that he has telepathic communication with 11 other masters, 4 as the interview is happening, is due to meet with Nicolas Flamel, lives underneath a cathedral, operates an antique shop, is the last of the Knights Templar, has a 17-kilogram pet beetle, and is kept well enough in financial security by the Rosicrucian Order, which he founded. This he explained while standing in front of the Palace of Versailles, flashing what he alleged was 1 million francs in a brown envelope. Undoubtedly, it is difficult to regard this whirlwind of information with anything other than extreme skepticism. And yet, Richard Chanfrey aside, the legend of the Count of Saint Germain is rich and at times tantalizingly convincing. With so much testimony and historical record, one's imagination truly can run. When people, both present day and in the past, have tried to explain the Count and his professed immortality, all manner of theories have been presented. In addition to the skeptical cries of fraud, there are assertions that he was a time traveller, that he was an alien being, that he was an enlightened master of ancient wisdom or elder brother of the human race, or that he was the greatest alchemist to have ever lived. Or indeed lives, for if the legend is true, then the Count of Saint Germain may very well still walk among us, generating wonder and mystery the same as he always has. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do let me know by leaving a comment, and of course subscribing for more of the paranormal. Equally, don't forget to check out my code SCHOLAR for $10 off your Hunter Killer Murder Mystery Box subscription. The link is in the description. Thank you again. Until next time.